until the lions have their own historians. The history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. This African proverb perfectly sums up a story that's been deliberately buried for generations. It's the story of a civilization that gave the world mathematics, philosophy, and architecture, and the aggressive campaign to erase who they really were. For centuries, a dominant narrative in Western history was built on a lie so fundamental it has shaped our very understanding of the world. That lie? That ancient Egypt was anything but a black African civilization. But one man, a brilliant and fearless scholar, came forward with scientific proof that shattered this story. He was a physicist, an anthropologist, a historian, and a linguist. His name was Cheikh Anta Diop. This is the story of how Diop's revolutionary work made him a primary target of academic institutions that were determined to silence him. And why, in the end, they couldn't. To get why Diop's work caused such an explosion, you have to understand the official story he was challenging. For generations, Western academia had carefully crafted a narrative that pushed ancient Egypt right out of Africa. They'd call it Mediterranean, Near Eastern, even Caucasian, anything to disconnect it from the very continent it was on. This wasn't just a simple mistake. Was a pillar of colonial thinking. Think about it. At the height of colonialism and the slave trade, the idea of a highly advanced black civilization wasn't just awkward, it was dangerous to the whole system. How can you justify enslaving a people if their ancestors built the pyramids and charted the stars while Europe was still, in many ways, finding its footing? The answer was simple. You rewrite history to deny their greatness. You cut Egypt off from the rest of Africa, both on the map and in the story of race. This was the great lie, and it was everywhere in museums, textbooks, and universities across the Western world. Archaeologists like George Reisner in the early 20th century openly looked down on the idea that Egyptians were black Africans. This wasn't just a consensus. It was a calculated effort to protect a racial hierarchy that served the colonial powers. The history of Egypt was, essentially, whitewashed. This was the intellectual fortress Cheikh Anta Diop was about to attack, and its defenders would not give up their foundational lie without a fight. Born in Senegal on December 29, 1923, Cheikh Anta Diop was a true polymath. He traveled to Paris to study, diving deep into physics, chemistry, history, and linguistics. This wasn't a man of opinions or vague theories. He was interested in one thing: hard, scientific proof, and he came prepared. First, Diop brought out the receipts from the ancients themselves. He pointed to the writings of Greek and Roman historians like Herodotus, the father of history, who actually went to Egypt. Herodotus described the people as melon crows, a Greek word meaning black-skinned, and having woolly hair. These were clear, first-hand accounts that had been conveniently swept under the rug for centuries. Second, he brought his science background to the fight with his most groundbreaking proposal, the melanin dosage test. Diop developed a method to analyze the skin of Egyptian mummies to determine their melanin levels. After getting samples from the Musée de l'Homme in Paris, tests revealed that the melanin concentration in the pharaoh's skin was high enough to classify them as black. This was no longer about interpreting art. This was an attempt to bring quantitative data into the debate. Third, he tackled the evidence hidden in language. Diop argued for profound connections between the language of ancient Egypt and modern West African languages, especially his own native tongue, Wolof. He laid out compelling similarities in grammar and vocabulary that, in his view, couldn't be a coincidence. For instance, the ancient Egyptians called their land Kemet, which means land of the black people. And they called themselves Kemichu, literally. The black people? This linguistic thread tied the civilization of the Nile right back to the heart of Africa. And he didn't stop there. He presented bone measurements showing skeletal structures consistent with other black African populations and highlighted cultural links in traditions like matriarchy and circumcision that connected pharaonic Egypt to its sub-Saharan neighbors. The academic establishment didn't exactly roll out the red carpet for this wave of evidence. They reacted with fury. Diop's work was a direct assault on their historical narrative, and they fought back with everything they had. The first major blow landed in 1951. Diop submitted his doctoral thesis at the famous Sorbonne in Paris, arguing that ancient Egypt was a black civilization. The jury rejected it flat out, calling it too ambitious. It was a clear attempt to shut him down before he could even get started. Diop took that rejected thesis and published it himself in 1954 as the book *Nations, Negro, Ec Culture, Negro Nations and Culture. The book sent shockwaves through the academic world and made him a hero in Africa's growing independence movements, but it also painted an even bigger target on his back. Mainstream Western Egyptologists lined up to discredit him. They accused him of everything from bad methodology to being racially biased himself. Classic case of projecting your own issues onto the person challenging you. They tried to paint him as a political activist just pretending to be a scholar. For nearly a decade, the Sorbonne kept rejecting his thesis. He was marginalized, professionally isolated, and his work was either ignored or mocked. But Diop was relentless. Finally, in 1960, after years of fighting, he successfully defended his thesis and was awarded his doctorate. The war for recognition, however, was just getting started. The year is 1974. The setting, Cairo, Egypt. UNESCO convenes a landmark event, the Symposium on the Peopling of Ancient Egypt, for the first time. The world's leading Egyptologists would gather to debate the very question Diop had dedicated his life to. This was it. The intellectual arena, Cheikh, would finally confront his critics face to face. Out of 20 experts invited, Diop and his colleague, Dr. Théophile Obenga, were the only two black scholars arguing for the African origin of Egypt. The odds were stacked 18-2. For 4 days, the debate raged. Diop and Obenga systematically presented their mountain of evidence, the ancient testimonies, the melanin analysis, the linguistic links, the cultural parallels. The Western Egyptologists, who had dismissed his work for decades, now had to actually confront it. They couldn't easily refute Herodotus. They struggled to explain away the linguistic data. By the end, While the symposium did not reach a unanimous consensus, the official UNESCO report acknowledged the power of the evidence presented by Diop and Abinga. It was a turning point. Diop had forced the establishment to listen and admit his argument had merit. He had faced the giants of Western academia on their own turf and fundamentally changed the conversation forever. This story is just one example of a history that has been hidden from us. There are countless other figures like Cheikh Anta Diop whose work challenges the narratives we've all been taught. If you want to uncover more of these hidden stories and reclaim a history that belongs to everyone, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Cheikh Anta Diop passed away in 1986, but his work is more important today than ever. He didn't just argue that ancient Egypt was a black civilization. He gave a priceless gift of historical identity and pride back to a continent and its diaspora. He believed that just as European culture draws strength from its past in Greece and Rome, African culture must be rebuilt on the foundation of its own classical antiquity, Egypt. His legacy is one of fierce intellectual courage. Some critics still dismiss his work. They can no longer simply ignore it. As a final recognition of his monumental impact, the University of Dakar, the largest university in Senegal, was renamed Universite Cheikh Anta Diop in his honor. He was the scholar they tried to hate because he was the scholar they could not break. He proved that the history of the hunt won't always glorify the hunter, not when the lion learns how to write.